Hi students, today we're going to talk about the volume of a sphere. You knew it was coming. We've already done the volume of a cone and the volume of a cylinder. And then yesterday in class we talked a little bit about spheres, talking about the hemisphere, which is half of a sphere. So today we're going to jump right in and look at volume. So the first thing I want to do though is review those other formulas. The volume of a cylinder is the, let's see, pi times radius squared times the height. Sorry, it's late in the evening for me while I'm recording these. So the volume of a cone then is 1/3 of the volume of the cylinder. So basically we just multiply the whole volume by 1/3. And I do want to tell you, I noticed a lot of you are getting tripped up with that 1/3. So I do want to show you another way to look at it. Instead of multiplying that whole thing by 1/3, the volume of a cone could be looked at this way. It could be looked at as pi times radius squared times height, and then you divide all of that by 3. And that's the same thing as multiplying by 1/3. It's just looking at it a little differently. I just want you to be aware that it's the same thing. So if you ever see something like this, you'll know it's the same formula. It's just written as a division problem versus multiplying by a fraction. And then finally, I know you were waiting for this. You can now know the volume of a sphere, and I spelled that wrong, a sphere, is instead of 1/3, we've got 4/3 pi. And then the radius also deals with the height. So it's not radius squared anymore, it's radius cubed. Okay, so that's the formula for a sphere. So keep that in your brains for when you do the homework. And let's move on to some of these example problems that they have here for us. The first one says that we have a cone, a sphere, and a cylinder, and they all have the same radii and the same heights. So the radius of the cylinder is 5 units. And they're asking you to answer these questions and when necessary, express all answers in terms of pi. And I know you guys like that versus multiplying it out. So let's mark this up and see what we've got. Radius of the cylinder is 5 units. So here's the cylinder, that's about the center here. Here's the radius, and that's 5. And they say they all have the same radius. So here's the sphere, so let's mark that radius. And here's the cone, so let's mark that radius. And then let's see what they're going to ask us to, because they said it's all the same heights, but they didn't give us the height. And now they're asking, whoops, I marked this R and it really should be 5 because they gave us the radius as 5. So the height of the cylinder they want to know. Well, they didn't give us the height of the cylinder, but they did give us the radius of all of them. And if you remember from our discussion in class, the radius of the sphere is the same in all directions. So if the radius is 5 going this way, it's also 5 going this way, which also means, I'm going to switch colors here on you, which also means that the radius is also 5 going this way. So with that information, we know what the height of the sphere is, which is 5 here and 5 there. So the overall height is 10. And then they tell us that they all three have the same height. So we know that the height of the cylinder now is also 10. And the height of the cone is 10 as well. So the answer to number 1 then, what is the height of the cylinder? The answer is 10. And they don't tell us, it's just 10 units. Then they want us to figure out what is the volume of the cylinder. Well, again, volume equals pi times radius squared times height. And I always like to just kind of, as we're learning this, just rewrite it every time because it's going to help you remember, especially when we're working with the cylinder volume, the cone volume, and the sphere volume. It's going to help keep that clear when you're plugging in numbers here. So let's look at what we have. The pi we know is pi. Radius we already know is 5. So 5 squared is 25. And then we're multiplying it by the height, and we just figured that out as 10. So as we simplify that, 25 times 10 is 250, and then we have pi. So the volume of the cylinder is 250 times pi. Then they ask us to do the same thing for the cone. Well, the volume of a cone is 1/3 times pi r squared times the height. So we're going to plug numbers in again. We're going to have pi, I'll do it that way, pi times the radius, which is 25, radius squared, times the height, which is 10, times 1/3. All right. So if I multiply all of that out, I'm going to get 250 divided by 3 times pi. And that is the volume of the cone. And finally, they ask us, what is the volume of the sphere? Well, the volume of the sphere is, find it here, V, volume equals 4/3 pi times the radius cubed. So let's start plugging in numbers. 4/3 times pi. The radius is 5. So we've got 5 times 5 times 5. So this is 25 times 5 is 125. So we have 4/3 pi times 125. And as we look at that, 4 times 125 is 500. And then we've got divided by 3. So it's going to be 500 divided by 3 times pi. And that's the volume of the sphere. And we explained our reasoning because we showed all of our work. Let's move on to section 3, part 3 of this lesson. And then again, they're giving us the 3 figures, and they're saying again that they have the same radii and the same heights. And they this time want r to be the length of the radius. So this time as we mark our radius, we've got r. And this time we've got r here and r here. And again, for the sphere, we have r. And then I'm going to go ahead and switch back here to blue to show you the other one. This is r. So all together here, we have 2 times r for the height. And again, we can figure if it's all the same and they're not giving us any numbers here, the height then for the cylinder would be 2 times r, and the height for the cone would be 2 times r. Okay, so we've marked everything we know, and they want us to express our answers in terms of pi again. So they asked, what is the height of the cylinder in terms of r? And I just answered that for you. It's 2r. And again, we figured that out by looking at the radius of the sphere and knowing the radius of the sphere goes half from the top to the center is 1/2. That's one radii. And then from the center to the bottom is the other. So if we have 2 r's, we can do 2 times r. Number 2 says, what is the volume of the cylinder in terms of r? So we know that the volume of a cylinder is pi times radius squared, and our radius is r, so radius squared times our height. Well, we know our height is 2r. So that's going to be multiplied times 2r. And then when we take that over to simplify it, we have pi times radius cubed, because we have a radius squared times a radius. So we have radius cubed times 2. And when we simplify this, anytime there's a number with the pi symbol and a variable, we mathematically like to put that first. So it's going to be 2 times pi times radius cubed. And that would be the volume of that cylinder. So we did the same thing that we did up above, but this time we don't have numbers, we just have more variables. So let's look at the volume of the cone in terms of R. So the volume of a cone is that 1/3 times pi r squared times height. So let's start plugging in what we know. Well, we know we need that 1/3 still. We know we need pi still. We know we need the radius squared. And then what is the height of our cone? Well, the height of the cone is 2r. So we're going to multiply that by 2r again. So let's start simplifying this. I'm going to move all the numbers to the front. So I have 2 times 1/3 times pi times my radius squared times my radius. So I've got radius cubed. And again, when I simplify that again, 2 times 1/3, this is like 2 over 1 times 1/3. So we have 2/3 times pi times radius cubed. And that would be the volume in terms of R, the volume of the cone. And then the volume of the sphere in terms of R is going to be 4/3 times pi times radius cubed. And we don't have anything else to fill in there for the volume of the sphere. That's just the volume of the sphere formula, because we don't have a height, because it's taken care of in that radius cubed. So we're done with that one, or we can put a box around it because that's our final answer. Now, number 5 is an interesting problem. They're telling you that the volume of the cone is 1/3 the volume of a cylinder. And we know that because of the formula, right? We have in here, if we look at the volume of the cone, so the volume of the cone over here is 2/3 times pi times radius cubed. And we're going to compare that to the volume of the cylinder. And the volume of the cylinder we found is 2 pi r cubed. So there are the two volumes, and we're going to compare those. And if we look at what we have here, pi cancels out pi. Pi divided by pi is 1. Radius cubed divided by radius cubed is also 1. So really all we have here is 2/3 divided by 2. And when you're working with fractions, it's always nice to work with it this way. And when you have 2/3 divided by a whole number, you need to change that whole number to a fraction. And then we go back to that keep change flip to multiply by, to divide fractions. You really multiply by the reciprocal. And then you know that 2 cancels out 2, and you get 1/3. So all of this was just to show you how they got this. Now they're asking us, well, what is the volume of the sphere? Actually, the volume of the sphere is what fraction of the volume of the cylinder. So now we need to compare the volume of the sphere to the volume of the cylinder and kind of replicate this for these two. So the volume of the sphere we found is 4/3 times pi times radius cubed. And we're comparing that to the volume of the cylinder, which again is 2 pi times radius cubed. So I'm going to change back to blue again so you guys don't get these confused. So pi divided by pi is 1. Radius cubed divided by radius cubed is 1. So all I have left is this 4/3 divided by 2. 4/3 divided by 2 is like 2 over 1. And I've got 4/3 multiplied by the reciprocal. I cancel these two out. This one goes to 2. 2 times 1 is 2, and 3 times 1 is 3. So the answer to this problem is the volume of the sphere is 2/3 the volume of the cylinder. And basically that is your lesson for lesson 20. You don't have practice problems to do today. We're just going to do those in class when you come back on Monday. I will talk to you again in the lesson video for the next lesson.